I know it seems like big things are happening, but they aren't. Nothing is happening. That's why I'm going back on an old decision. Partly why. It's occurred to me that if I should suddenly die, several important parts of the punk story would disappear without a trace. So for those of you who find it boring, go away and come back later. For the rest of you, I'm offering 3 pieces of punk in 3 separate posts. Something to do while we wait for Israel to work up the balls to hit Iran. Remember St. Nuke? Everybody wanted to write about him. The first of the excerpts is focused on the first king of Punk City. It's from the memoirs of Insect Brain. He calls it Fire. Being the inside-out looking back from hardly started memoirs of Insect Brain, the one called the weirdest of punks, the one accused of having been to college, and the one who finally achieved the title of indomitable protector of Gypsy the King. I wasn't there early on. What I know of those early days I learned from the writings, which don't always tell it the way it was. South Street is not just a street. It is an area, a place apart. It is an old place. When Philadelphia was just a narrow strip of commerce along the Delaware, it was there already, bustling no doubt with breeches and snorting horses and the bobbing of tri-cornered hats. Every age has its costume, its own backdrops and curtains. Today these are all put away for a time. South Street has gone latent, waiting for a new drama. It is pretending that no dramas have been enacted there in a long time. But this is a ruse. I was called Insect Brain. It was a name that suited me, at the start anyway. Other punks took names they had to grow into, names that made them or killed them. Mine I worked to escape, climbing hand over hand up the sticky stem of its punchline. The glint of the scythe winked permanently in the corner of my eye. The trick was to get to the blossom before they cut you down. But then, that was the whole trick of South Street. I was nothing special, like almost everybody else. Nobody remembers much about the punk rockers. In a movie, they would be the extras in the wide opening shot, just enough in focus to be recognizable as types. The girl with black lipstick and corset, pale faces with hacked shrubbery hair and blue steel accessories, guitar cases and legs too thin to walk on, tight black shirts with sleeves below the elbow to hide the needle tracks, obscenities riding on harsh, hoarse voices. They cross back and forth in front of the camera, giving us intermittent glimpses of the South Street bars. Colonial brick, hand-painted signs, tortured black and white poster art with crazed typography. A movie couldn't give us the smell, but we could imagine it. Sweat, dirty clothes, steeped in stale smoke, the foul, sweet breath of alcohol. At night, sounds. The chainsaw edge of cheap guitars. big boots scuffing dirty floors, stirring the sawdust of punk rock chords. In the corners, the losers, the ones who can't get a girl, can't afford a fix, can't find a band to be in. If you could look into their eyes, you would see the hard, bright blanks of fevered rats. My first memory is of St. Nuke. This was well after the beginning. He was berating us. "Do you want to go back?" he asked. His voice was like the rasp of a file, hoarse, rough, and scraping. "Do you think it was easier then?" We thought it was. We felt like boot camp recruits. He was the drill sergeant. Mordecai Glum had lasted 2 weeks in the army. They threw him out when they found his works. For him, South Street was the last stop on the line, and he was our expert on oppression. His verdict: this is no better than the army and a lot more dangerous. St. Nuke overheard him. We thought we could say what we liked. We weren't in bands. We didn't have to stand and fight in the blade, where your words were a matter of life and death and your name was on everyone's lips. Nobody cared what our names were. Our job was to untangle the cables on the vast concrete floor of the bitter box, where the bands were writing the Boomer Bible into the system. For us Newans, the toughest part of the Nuke law was no drugs. If they found them on you, you were out of Punk City, just like that. No excuses, no explanations, no second chances. We thought that meant we had the right to grumble. We didn't figure St. Nuke would take any notice of us, but he did. "Do you want to go back to where you were?" he asked, getting right into Mordecai's face. "You poor, overworked little children." He looked at me, or rather, he raked his eyes past me, and I felt as if 2 bloody slashes had opened in my face. I hated him with that one tiny part of my gut that was not iced in terror. And then he dialed up the terror until the hate froze into a jagged iceberg. "Everybody stop!" St. Nuke shouted. His voice was loud, echoing in the gigantic open space of the bitter box. Everybody stopped and turned to stare at us. St. Nuke climbed up on a small stack of pallets and spoke to the bands. "We have some new ones here who think that life in Punk City is too hard." There were snickers. Everybody welcomed the break, looked forward to a show. I glanced over at Mordecai. The front of his trousers had a dark spreading stain, and I edged away from his ammoniac reek. St. Nuke was playing to the crowd. "This raises an important question, which I think we should settle right away. Namely, what should life in Punk City be like? These new ones think it should be easy. Now, I'm sure this is a brand new thought to most of us. If someone had only contributed this insight sooner, we might have been spared much." Here, St. Nuke opened his black silk shirt and displayed a hairless chest so streaked and ravaged by angry red scars as to make one look away. He spread the fingers of his left hand on his sternum, keeping his right within inches of the scriber haft at his belt, and began to explore the map of his wounds. His fingers were long and thin, and they quivered in contact with his flesh, as if they were feeling all the pain which had coursed through those raised ridges and pouting puncture marks. "If I had only known," he sneered, "that these new ones had a better way, I would have done things differently. I would have made no demands on you or me." And we might have sat for a decade or so, wrapped in the opulent wisdom of the easy life. We could have allowed the Duke to remain in charge while we strolled in safety under the magnanimous shade of his hammer. We could have written our bad little songs without bloodshed. And comforted each other in the small hours with lovely, flaccid, unscarred bodies. If we had only known. Then he turned his attention away from the laughing bands and back to us. The laughter stopped. He leaned forward from his pallet perch and aimed one thin finger at Mordecai, Steerhead, and me. "But we didn't know," he said with razor softness. "We thought the easy life might be more like dying. And so we decided to learn about work and pain and words instead. Now, we know more about those than you do. Which means it's time for you to start learning about them too." St. Nuke gestured at 0 days. "Take them," he said, "out to the block. $10 lashes each. Then keep them cuffed in the stocks for 24 hours. If they want to leave after that, let them go." It was Trixie Slit who whipped us. She was beautiful like a punked-out angel of death. Her arm was firm and sheened in sweat as she brought it down again and again, erupting the fire on our backs. As I said, St. Nuke is my first memory of Punk City.